Are artists really lone wolves?
Join us as we unravel the truth behind collaboration and community. Are they essential for artistic growth?
We're going to start with the idea of the lone wolf being a stereotypical type person. And we wanted to actually do this because we want you to see the extremes of how
Mm.
people see it. So we're thinking about the lone wolf as being a bit like the mad scientist, somebody who can only create that creativity by being on their own, etc. Which is something, well, I personally think that anybody can be creative, and you can be creative whilst you're walking about and doing other things. That's sort of where I'm coming from. But I do understand that there are artists out there who are a bit like that as well. Do you
Mm.
agree? Do you
Mm.
understand what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's probably taken from like this historic idea that you have to be like a real maverick to be an artist and create something different and unique. If you look a lot of the traditional artists, they were often kind of painted as being a bit crazy and being out there and almost being like an outsider in society as
Mhm.
well in
Mm.
order to pursue their art.
Which makes sense because
Hmm.
they were producing something new. Because if
Yeah.
they're the four leaders, they're going to be
Yes.
producing things that aren't traditional, aren't the norm.
Yeah.
So because they're moving into a different movement. But what's interesting is a lot of those people didn't do it in isolation.
No.
So you tended to be movements. One
Mm.
artist inspires another.
Yeah. Yeah. And they still managed to find people that were similar and like-minded and wanted to pursue similar things as a
Mm.
group. But I think there's definitely something as an artist where you've got to accept that you're not going to be like the norm, like everybody else. That does have to be a part of you that's going to be a bit resilient because not everybody's going to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Mm.
I th- I think the danger is that some people, when they're pursuing their art, they might think that they have to do it all alone because they might speak to friends and family and be kind of misunderstood and almost retreat into their own kind of art bubble.
Yeah, I think there's another thing as well. Have you ever come across artists that are keeping a secret of what their art is?
Mm,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm of the view that you can share anything because if you're finding your own unique voice,
Mm,
it's not to do with a technique.
mm,
But there are definitely artists who are keeping a technique
mm,
because that's the way their art is produced, and they wouldn't want to give all of their secrets away, even when they're teaching. Sometimes you get
mm,
that,
mm,
and I've never understood that ever
mm.
because I think nobody else is going to produce what you're producing.
No, of course they're not. Where you're going to have
Yeah.
your own unique take on something, no matter whether it's the same subject, the same medium. You're going to
Mm.
interpret it differently, and you wouldn't want to create art like somebody else because then you're not creating art; you're just copying somebody. So you're not really going to get the same satisfaction from it either.
So if we're not talking about stereotype, right,
Mm,
because there is this stereotype,
yeah.
if it's not about the stereotype, but we're talking about individuals, that
Mm,
some people are more loners than others, is
mm.
that related to personality? Because it would make sense if that was the case.
In part, but I do also think there's a misunderstanding around what an introvert is, being an introvert myself.
Yeah. So Ruth's an introvert, if you didn't realise, on this
I
podcast.
and I'm not I'm not extremely introverted, so I've done, like, personality tests because I love doing all of that stuff. I find it really interesting. So I'm not on the extreme end of the introvert, I'm more towards the extroverted side of an introvert, but anyway, my personality, I've also experienced a lot of people that have kind of misunderstood what introversion is. So for me, it's about how you recharge. So I
Mm.
recharge my energy by being on my own and I suppose kind of that's how I process the world as well, is like I have to retreat back in for a little while if I've had too much social time. It's not that I don't like being with people. I love being with people. I'm very social, but I do have to be in the mood to be social as well. And if I'm not, it's quite obvious. I get grouchy.
And I have actually seen that. Sorry, Ruth. She's like, end of the
Enough.
session now. That's enough.
I have to
Um,
though to put the boundaries in place.
yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I'm sort of the opposite. I'm quite
Mhm.
extrovert,
Yeah.
really. I can feed off the energy of
Mhm.
other people.
Yeah.
So you would expect for doing a demonstration in front of people would be hard work, but actually the energy that comes from people, I find it very hard. If you're in a class and people aren't like heckling you, I love being
Mm.
heckled. It's like
Mhm.
in the middle of a class, which is a very, very odd thing to say, but you can read the room and you can feel
Yeah.
those energies.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
However, I was wondering how this affects you in the studio, because that's
Mm.
quite interesting.
Mm.
So you say that you need to go into yourself to
Mm.
process things,
Mm.
but does that include going onto the canvas? That is really interesting.
Mm.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. I personally think every artist needs to be able to pursue their own authentic way of creating.
Mm.
And to do that, I don't think you can do that in a group of people. I think you need to be comfortable enough to be able to sit on your own and work that through and work that out. And that definitely comes through when I'm painting, you know. I was thinking about it yesterday actually, as I was painting. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do when I was painting before I
Mm.
started. But as soon as I started thinking about all these different ideas were coming to me.
Mm.
And to me, that's about being on your own and being able to tap into your own voice.
Yeah. And I must admit that if I'm demonstrating, you are demonstrating. And sometimes, even with everybody around,
Mm.
you'll go into your own little world, and then it's very
Mm.
hard because I can't talk and demonstrate at the same
Yeah,
time when that's happening. And
yeah,
so I think that's when you're tapping into that intuitive side of you.
yeah.
You can't do that. I think it must be a different part of the brain from talking, because
Mm.
it almost does that, doesn't it? Where I've been in a demo and just like gone really quiet, and that's because it's starting to really work, if
Mm.
that makes sense.
Mm.
Um, I don't know whether it does. What I do though sometimes is I'll put music on in the studio,
Mhm.
because I think, and it's not that I need the company, but it's that there's something there
Yeah,
extra,
yeah.
and that helps me. And I don't know if you put music on in the studio.
I always have to have music on.
Mm,
So I don't think that's a
thing.
introvert extrovert thing. I think that's quite common.
Sometimes though, I do need quiet, and I am extrovert,
Mm.
but yeah,
Mm.
or very loud. It does depend. But yeah,
I can't have anybody talking to me or interrupting me when I'm doing my art. If somebody pops in and starts a conversation with me, I'll just lose track. That's like the focus thing, I think, isn't it? When you're
it
focused
is.
on your
Yeah.
art.
You know, when you're in the studio and then the
Mm.
phone rings,
Yeah,
and then you
yeah,
go back to it, and then something else happens. It's
yeah.
like,
And it just
yeah,
takes you ages to get back into it again, doesn't it?
yeah, definitely. We've been talking about the activity, and what I mean by activity is the physical doing the art, and the fact that we think as a part of the process, you do need to have some alone time,
Mm.
or even if you're in a room, because I can paint with other people in a room. If everybody goes quiet,
Mm.
you must have experienced that. Or when I go out with Lydia and I, we go out for the whole day with each other. but just ignore each other apart from when we're actually having a cup of tea. We'll do things like show each other the work or
Yeah.
whatever, but it'll be at tea time or at
Yeah.
lunchtime. So I think that is an element. What I want to do is try and split that from the stereotypical view and it's part of the process view.
Mm. Mm.
You said at the beginning, didn't you? You were thinking there was two sides to this.
Yeah, there's kind of two elements to it. Like you were saying, I think the activity of actually being creative and doing your artwork does definitely require alone time or the right space and the right environment to do that. So you might be in a shared artist studios, for example, but you will still all be creating your art and kind of respecting each other's space in order to do that. And then there's the other side of it, which is almost, to me, I think is even bigger than producing your art, because when you're an artist, no matter what level you're at, what ambitions you have, big or small, there's still an element of, well, how do I share that with the world? What do I want from my art? And where do I
Mm.
want to take it next? And that element to me is extremely difficult, in my opinion, to pursue on your own. So that might look like, for example, you might want to get an art tutor to help you with your art skills. That requires another person.
Or you might be inspired by artists, even if it's like artists from the past.
Mm,
It still has a connection to other
mm,
people. In fact, the big thing to talk about is those art movements, those individual artists that
mm,
are portrayed as lone artists
mm.
were part of whole art movements. It's often because people got together. We were talking, weren't we, about Braque and Picasso,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they were sharing a house,
yeah.
and Picasso went out and Braque picked up a few bits of, well, I don't know whether it was paper or,
Mhm.
but it became the start of collage in fine art, and that became cubism. But that wasn't just a lone pursuit; it was a lone pursuit. He did it whilst Picasso was out.
Yeah, it's like they each had enough space for their own individual visions,
Yes,
but they came together.
and fed off each other.
Yes.
Yeah. So Picasso comes back, sees what Braque's done,
Yeah.
and then you know, cubism is born. It's quite interesting, and you get a lot of collaboration between artists. And I think, particularly as they get more further down the line, so it's almost like you can collaborate even more. At the very
Mm.
beginning, you often come together when you're learning, don't you?
Mm.
I wonder if you go through a patch where you are more in your own space, and then
But
it's
yeah,
yeah.
probably. I think you need a period of that, don't you, to really get clear about what you want to do with your art and where you want to take your own individual practice. And then I think after that, you'll be thinking, where do I take this next? What do I want to do?
Mm,
In order to work that out as well, I think you really need to speak to people about their experiences as an artist and what they've done, because there's so many options out there now to be an artist. I mean, it's almost unlimited, isn't it? And can be a little bit overwhelming. But
yeah. Yeah, yeah. You can get art licensing, which
yes.
is when you put things on repeated patterns or whatever,
Mm,
something that is an image of yours but is used on, I don't know, pots or
mm,
whatever it is. And then you can get gallery representation. You can
mm,
be your own artist selling
yeah.
through your website.
You,
There's so many different
yeah.
things, isn't
You
there?
could go down the commissions route and do personal artwork for people.
Art fairs.
Yeah. And then it's almost like, where do I fit into the world, isn't it?
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah, just where your art fits.
no.
It's also where you fit, because your art might fit in a certain gallery, for example,
Mm,
but you might go, I don't really want to do it via the gallery route. So it's also to do with your own personality as well, I
mm,
think, and what you
mm,
want, or
mm.
your own life, how it fits in with other people in your life. But also, I mean, I've always taught, and that's probably because I'm very social as well.
Thinking back to art school, they do encourage you to do things like group critiques whilst you're practicing your art as well, which I think helps develop it, which is also another aspect to how you can bounce things off people. There's so many ways, aren't there? I think sometimes what puts artists off the idea of like collaboration and community is like, oh, you're just doing it for the sake of doing it. But I think there's so many different ways that you can lean on each other and lean on different people's experience and knowledge.
And shortcut
Yes,
your
a
own.
lot of learning.
So I would go as far as to say that collaborating with other people helps you to move forward, both with your confidence,
Yeah,
big style with your confidence, I think, actually.
yeah.
So I'm doing an exhibition next year with two other artists, just running ideas off each other, and
Mm.
we're going over to the exhibition space together. I've seen it, but one of the others hasn't, and you just like that's something. So well, then we'll decide what paintings we do together. It's just quite nice to be working together, and
Mm.
once you've done that, maybe it becomes easier to do your solo exhibition.
Mm. I also think there's something about having conversation with artists that helps you articulate your vision and what it is that you're doing, because without that dialogue, if you're just having a conversation on your own, you can very quickly get into circles in your own head, can't you? And self
Yeah.
doubt and all this stuff. Whereas if I'm talking to you now about what I'm doing with my art and why I'm doing it, you might say, oh, that's really interesting. That reminds me of this artist, or have you thought about doing this? And then you have that back and forth conversation, and it helps really define your ideas.
Oh, it does make sense. They sort of slowly solidify. It doesn't mean that, well, you are having an influence, but it's more a bouncing off. Like
Yeah,
when, even in the past, and I know it's a different sort of creating with the writing, where you just like sometimes you have to verbalize
yeah.
in order for it to solidify in your head.
Yes.
That's
I think the other thing that it's reminded me of as well is that you've got to have conversations about your art with the right people, because if you don't, that can cause frustration,
blocks.
anger, insecurity, confusion. And it's not that these people are not meaning well by having a conversation with you about it. It's just that maybe they just don't quite understand what it is to be an artist and what art is. There's so many myths and stereotypes and everything around art, and we
Mm.
are unique creatures. And I do think being an artist is like a calling and something that's in, and some people just don't get it. So I think sometimes people put themselves into this lone wolf box because they've had negative experiences speaking to friends or family,
Ah, ah.
and they just don't get it.
I hadn't thought of that.
Mm.
Yeah.
I've had that experience before, and it's put me off reaching out to people again and speaking about things. But it's a totally different scenario now. If I have a conversation with an artist, generally I'm left feeling inspired, invigorated, excited, sometimes challenged in a positive way. All these different things come from the conversation versus somebody that doesn't quite understand what it is that you're doing or why you're doing it.
Yeah, so that's the like-mindedness. I think that if it's not just art. So people come to my group and they're painting. What they say is when they're not doing it, sometimes they'll lose doing the art, even though when they come into the class, so over the summer or something,
Mm,
because they're not having the contact with other people,
mm, mm.
they do actually sometimes lose it in between. But the atmosphere you get when you get a group of artists together is often really lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And that's the same in other pursuits,
Yeah.
hobbies, whatever. It's like, because it's just that like-mindedness of somebody understanding where you're coming from. So if
Mm,
I was to talk to, I don't know, somebody who wasn't an artist about the glorious features of quinacridone gold, they would just like go.
You've lost me.
But Sue and I, we've had lovely chats about paint.
Yeah.
It's not even to do with pursuing your art. That's just to do with interests and
Mm,
techniques and just being with people who
mm.
are like-minded.
Yeah, because let's be honest, you do have to be brave to be an artist because it is something totally different, isn't it? And like, there's no rule book or guidebook. So it's like having those sorts of conversations, I think it's almost like affirmation, isn't it? Of that,
That somebody else is interested too,
yeah,
which sounds really
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that you're not
It's
just
a big
like
thing.
off on one all by
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah, yeah. I, th- I think there's a big thing to collaborating with people in terms of your own professional development as well. Like you were speaking about doing group shows and then eventually leading on to your own exhibitions and things like that. And I think no matter whether you want to have a small exhibition in your local library or something, or whether you want to go bigger or more ambitious with your art, obviously you've got to reach out to people and make those connections with other people to enable that. Because
Mm.
when a gallery takes you on, what they're taking on is your personal view of the world, which is very unique to you. So they want to get to know you. Well, if they're a decent gallery and they're not just kind of churning stuff out, you know?
Mm.
So I think it is really important that you're able to make those connections and you're able to articulate your work as well, which comes back to having those conversations with people to work out what it is that you do while you're doing it. I can't imagine how it would be for somebody who's just created work in a solitary way all of their life. I think it's maybe quite an old fashioned idea that you kind of just get picked out of obscurity to be a famous artist. And I don't think it works like it used to with the advent of social media and everything. I think people care more now about personal stories and who the person is behind the artwork. I've gone quite deep there.
You
Quite
have, yeah,
quickly.
because I'm now thinking right way back to some of the artists were sponsored in the past, and I'm not
Mm.
saying we're not sponsored now, but what I'm talking about how it would have been.
Mm.
They would have had a patron is what the word was.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and you wouldn't have got a patron if you weren't probably fairly well off in
Mm.
the first place and had the right contacts. That's about
Mm.
knowing people.
Mm.
And interestingly, if you were a woman, you probably wouldn't have had the opportunities at
Mm.
all.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I still think it's going to work like that in some ways. Not in a, if you're a woman, you don't get the opportunities,
Mm.
but in the, depends where you live.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think there's that much going on in this particular area.
Mm. Mm.
There is stuff going on, there's Stafford Art Group, there's different things that are going on that locally, but it's not, and even a little bit further afield, the Birmingham Royal Society of Artists, and there's certain things, but you have to be accepted into them. So
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
have to be invited in, you have to know other artists, you have to be at a certain level, you have to go through a jury, etc. So all of that involves other people,
Mm. Mm.
doesn't it? If you
Yeah.
think about it, you put your art into an open call, somebody's judging it.
Yeah.
So even then, you have that there's more opportunity now than there used to be.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, of getting your art out into the world.
Mm.
But I think that also means that sometimes you have to have more help in as much as you're expected to do it all sometimes. So
Mm.
in the past, if you were fortunate enough to be recognised by a gallery because for whatever reason, whether it's because you've been introduced by somebody or whether, you've actually approached the gallery, it's not the point. The point is the gallery would take over all of that
Yeah.
marketing side of it.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I still think that there is that to a certain level as well about, but often you have to understand a lot around that business side, and that involves other people and learning as well.
Mm.
And that's not even the like-minded coming together with other artists and being inspired. So artists are inspired by other artists. Our art, any movement of art, is inspired by what's before. So that's the one side. And then the other side is sometimes you don't know what to buy or what to do or all of that side of it. And you talk to other artists and immediately you feel, oh, I can get my answers. I know what, I don't have to trawl the internet or do whatever to know how to do something. You can ask.
Yeah, which is a much quicker route to getting to where you want to be. I think what you were saying was interesting about art galleries now and the whole thing around marketing, because I think more than ever, you've almost got to be willing to put yourself out there on a platform when it comes to social media. That is going to attract eyes on you. And I think quite often the first kind of block that we have to get past as artists is be willing to show that to the world and say, I'm an artist and this is what I'm doing, which is
And
part
that's
of that human connection.
but also to say why you're doing it. And you have to go through your own processes of working it out. That's the internal processes, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
verbalize it, don't you?
yeah.
It's yeah, it's quite an interesting journey
Mm.
becoming.
It's exhausting at times.
Yeah. The other thing that you talked about earlier, which I thought would be interesting to bring up now, is authentic collaboration. So
Mm.
sometimes you'll go onto the internet or Instagram or something, and what you want to do is actually reach people who connect. And it's
Yeah,
not always
yeah.
that easy.
No, it's not. And I think there's also a bit of a stereotype. As soon as you use the word networking, artists will generally go, ugh, because networking to me just sounds like some corporate word that was kind of made up to surface level connect with people. And I think us as an artist, we want to connect with people on a deeper level and have an authentic connection. And I think you can absolutely do that. And I think there's ways and means of doing that as well to get authentic connections. But I think the initial thing of like getting out there and networking can feel off-putting to artists.
Mm. I think it's a bit scary at first as well
Oh,
because,
yeah. Because it's your art as well. You're putting yourself out there. It's very personal.
and calling yourself an artist to start with,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's you saying I'm an artist, which is like a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be another podcast topic.
I think it might be. But I mean, I went to an open studios yesterday and I met a lovely lady called Nicola and we ended up chatting for a couple of hours. And to me, that's like a way to authentically connect with somebody that I've never met her before, but we realised we had a lot of connections. She's done artwork in Dunfermline. She knows somebody that I know through the workshops that I do. And it was really refreshing to have a chat with her about her artwork, about what we're doing in the Art Hub as well, and the community that we've got there. And it was a really great conversation. So you never really know who you're going to bump into or what conversations you're going to have until you start to get yourself out there a little bit. I know other people that go to private views and things, and what they do is they'll bring somebody else with them, but then they'll go off and speak to other people and come back. So if you're feeling a little bit kind of intimidated by a situation, that's something that you could do to help make it feel a bit more easier, because then you've always got somebody to go back to if you have an awful conversation or whatever. So that's a good way of doing it as well.
Well, now we're going to talk about takeaways because we've had quite a good discussion.
We have, and I think the thing that struck me was that you need different people at different times of your life for different things. I don't want that to sound too kind of like you're just using people, but I think to help you on your journey, at one point you might need an art tutor or a teacher, and then you might move on to bouncing ideas off people. You definitely need your own space, and there's room for that. And then I think it's about finding your way in the world, which you always need people to do. So it's about different things at different times.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, I can see where the stereotypes come from because artists do need to have that space, even like the real extroverted ones like me who run classes in the studio. You almost feel like you said, if you're interrupted and you do need that time, otherwise you won't progress. I think it's quite interesting because I probably in the past always almost disbelieved the lone wolf thing, and I think that's because I've always had a lot of people around me with the art, whether it's that I've had a class or it's been other artists. But I do understand. And the reason I understand is because you do have to have that time on your own that is in your own space. Even if there's other people around, you have to be within yourself and to tap into that intuition.
And I think there's also a lot of advantages to being a lone wolf. I don't think it has to be a negative thing either. I think if you can be resilient and brave and forge your own path and be ambitious and in the best possible way care a little bit less about what other people think as well. I think you do need that aspect of your personality, and you can use that as a really positive thing.
Mm.
But for me, it's about, I suppose, getting that balance to be able to pursue your art in the way that you want to and make authentic connections with people that are like-minded. You, even as an introvert, I get a heck of a lot from that, from those kinds of relationships. So I think there's a way of being both.
Yeah. Yes, and genuinely interested in your art and your pursuit because it's so easy. You know, at the beginning when everybody's saying, well, can you, because I used to get all sorts of requests of, can you do this commission? Can you paint this
Yeah,
portrait? Can you do
yeah.
that? Because until you actually say, well, that's not what I do this, this is who I am. And
Mm,
until you know that, you're just all over the place because it's
mm,
amazing how many different things people can ask you to
mm,
do as
mm.
an artist. And I think, and that's not even something we've touched on, other people influencing your path along a different trajectory to what you actually want it to be.
Yeah.
So you have to learn to follow those nudges and those excitements, really. You
Yeah,
get an excitement, don't you?
yeah.
And if you can call that the lone wolf in you, then it's very welcome, if that
Mm,
makes sense.
mm,
It's not, but I don't think that you can move forward so much in a career without other people. That's going to be very difficult.
I agree.
Yeah. So,
And
I mean,
a lot less interesting and
fun,
enjoyable. Yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Because when you're with like minded people, it is fun.
Yeah.
We can't record something and talk about connections with other people without mentioning our fairly new community. We've got the founders now coming in. So for the first
Yeah.
100, we've got an offer. We will put something below. But that aside, everything that we're doing in Art Hub is about being in a community where you're supported by
Mm,
other people who may be a little bit further ahead in their journey than you, a little bit further behind. This is not the idea of this is not for all beginners or all experts. That's not the idea. It's about being amongst other artists.
and supporting each other. And It's an online membership, so you can go in there and literally ask any question you want, and you'll get support from people in there. But we've also got content in there that's going to inspire you and make you think about your art practice and what you want to do as an individual within your art practice. So it definitely helps with the progression of your artistry. And you've got a lovely community around you to support you every step of the way as well.
Yeah.
It's the best of both worlds, isn't it? Because you can step in and out of it when suits you as well.
Yeah, we've got chat areas, but those chat areas are off the social media space, so there's not other things that are distracting, really. It's all within that space. So, yeah, we're really excited about it. We are there. We want to be there. So that's
Yeah,
really good,
yeah,
and that's
yeah.
yeah,
And it actually comes back full circle to like my ambitions as an artist as well. I've been on quite a journey myself to get to this point, and what I want to do is help other artists on their way. And this community is a great way of being able to do that, to inspire other people and to help other people. I get such joy and excitement from that. I love it, and bringing people together.
yeah. And I've always loved to see people progress in their art because, I mean, that's what I've done. I've taught in things like village halls and stuff, and this just taking that to another level as well because I can reach out to
Exciting.
people
Yeah,
further afield. So
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah. Yes. So on that note,
I think that's us. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Bye for now.
See you soon.
Bye.